There is a sheet of paper on our refrigerator with 41 lines on it. It is yellow legal paper, soft at the folds, and it has been up there under the same magnet since October of 2025. 9 of those lines are crossed out in my handwriting, 31 are crossed out in hers. 1 is not crossed out at all, and it is not going to be, and I will get to that. There is a rule in this house about that list, and it is the oldest rule we have. It is older than the marriage. It is older than the dog. The rule is that I am not allowed to touch a line that is not mine, and I do not get to decide which lines are mine, and the way a line becomes mine is that she asks me for it out loud, in words, and then she is the one who draws the pen through it when it is done. People think that is a joke between us. My nephew thinks it is a joke. He is 11, and last Thanksgiving he pointed at the list and said, "Uncle Ro isn't allowed to fix stuff," and everybody laughed, and I laughed. It is not a joke. That list is the whole reason I have a wife, because there was a stretch of about 5 weeks in the fall of 2025 when I nearly took a woman's house apart out of pure kindness, and she stood in her own kitchen with her voice coming apart and told me to stop, and if I had answered that the way I had answered it once before in my life, I would be a 40-year-old lineman living alone in a rented half of a duplex on the Guildford Road, and I would still be telling myself I was a helpful guy. So, the list. The house on Bear Hill Road, and the storm that took the mast off it, and the thing I found in her barn on the 9th of November that I have never been able to think about without my chest going tight. I'll start where I came in, which was with a chainsaw, at 3 in the morning in the rain. My name is Roland Michaud, Ro, since I was 6. I'm a journeyman lineman for the Piscataquis Valley Electric Cooperative, out of Dover, Foxcroft, Maine, which is a town of about 4,000 people in the middle of a county with more moose in it than voters. The co-op runs about 900 miles of line through some of the worst terrain in New England for keeping wire in the air. Spruce that grows fast and falls faster. Roads that are dirt for the last 4 miles. Ice storms that put a half-inch of glaze on every conductor in 3 towns and bring it all down at once with a sound you do not forget. I have been climbing since I was 22. My father was a lineman for the same co-op for 31 years. Here is the thing about the work, and it is going to matter. When a storm goes through, and a whole road loses power, and you get there at 2 in the morning in the rain, and you clear the tree and you set the pole, and you close in the fuse. The lights come on down that road, house by house, and people come out on their porches in bathrobes at 4 in the morning, and they wave at a bucket truck. Some of them cry. I have had a woman in Sangerville put a plate of eggs in my hands at 5 in the morning and refuse to take it back. There is no other job I know of where you get thanked like that. I want to say the next part carefully, because I have had 6 years to understand it and I still do not enjoy saying it out loud. My father, Gilles Michaud, was the man this whole county called at 2 in the morning. He plowed 4 driveways he was not paid for. He rebuilt the Sangerville church steps. When old Beulah Sprague's well pump quit in 1998, he was under her house on a Sunday. And inside his own house, that man did not say 4 sentences a night. My mother left in 2004 and I have never once been able to say she was wrong to. He was beloved by an entire county, and he was almost nowhere in his own kitchen. And the way he stayed in a room was to find something in it that was broken. I buried him in 2019, and about 400 people came, and I stood there shaking hands with people who told me stories about my father that I had never heard. And I went home and sat in my truck in the driveway, and understood that I was 30, and that every single one of those stories was going to be told about me. 3 years before this story starts, I was engaged to a woman named Camille Furland. 2 years, most of it good. I gutted and retiled her bathroom. I rebuilt her sill plate. I put a metal roof on her camp in Willimantic in a weekend with 2 guys I paid in beer. She ended it in April of 2022 and left a note on my kitchen counter because she said if she did it out loud, I would talk her into a project. The note said, "You have fixed everything I own, and you have never once asked me what I'm afraid of." I kept it. It is in the drawer with the takeout menus, which is either the healthiest or the least healthy thing about me, and I have never decided which. The storm came through on the 14th of October, 2025. Not a famous one. 40-mile winds on a wet fall with the leaves still on, which is the combination that costs us. We had 1,100 meters out at midnight. I got Bear Hill Road at about 1:30 in the morning with a bucket truck, a chainsaw, and a groundman named Petey Sear who talks the entire time. Bear Hill is 9 houses in 5 miles. 8 of them were dark, because the primary was down at the top of the hill, under a spruce. The 9th was dark for its own reasons. A limb had come through and taken the service mast right off the corner of the house, the pipe that carries the drop to the meter, and it was hanging off the fascia by the conduit and a strip of aluminum, with the wire still lived down to the transformer, which is exactly the kind of thing that kills a curious person. That is co-op work up to the meter. Past the meter is the homeowner's electrician. Every lineman in America can recite that line in his sleep. There was a woman standing in the dooryard in a raincoat over a nightgown with a flashlight, keeping about 15 feet back from the mast, which told me she knew exactly what she was looking at. I said, "Ma'am, I need you inside." She said it's arcing at the fascia. I turned the main off at 4 o'clock when I heard it hit. I stopped in the rain and looked at her. 99 people out of 100, in that dooryard, at that hour say, "When's the power coming back?" This one had shut off her main 4 hours earlier, by herself in the dark, and had positioned herself outside the fall radius. We killed it at the transformer, and I got the mast off the house and rigged it temporary, and Petey ran the tree work at the top of the hill, and I told her she'd need an electrician for the permanent, and that I'd get her lights back that night either way. She said thank you, and she meant it, and she did not ask me for one other thing. That was the first thing about Thea Hollins. She was 40 years old. She had bought that farmhouse, 1911 L and barn attached, 40 acres of hardwood behind it, in June, from 400 miles away. Sight unseen except for photographs, from a family in Connecticut she had no history with. She had been in Maine 4 months. She did the books part-time and remotely for 3 small businesses. She knew no one. I came back at 7 that same morning to check my temporary rig in daylight, and she made me coffee, because that is what people up here do, and I stood in that kitchen for 4 minutes with a cup in my hand. And that is when I saw the list. Yellow legal paper on the refrigerator under a magnet from a Bangor tire shop. Numbered. Her handwriting is small and hard and slants back, like it was learned fast by somebody who never had time. 1. Front door sticks. 2. Cellar bulkhead, rot at the sill. 3. Kitchen faucet, hot side. 4. Storm windows, 6 sashes, reglaze, and on down the page. 41 lines. Not one of them was crossed off yet. Number 17 was porch steps. Rebuild all 4. Treads and stringers. I read that whole list in about 11 seconds, and I felt something in my chest that I recognized and did not examine, which was the feeling of walking into a room where I finally knew what to do. I did the faucet 3 days later. That is the truth, plainly, She did not ask. I came back on the Friday to see if her electrician had shown. He had not. Because there were 4 electricians in that county and 1,100 customers had just had a storm, and the hot side of that kitchen faucet was dripping into a pan, and I had a cartridge in my truck kit that fit it, and it took 11 minutes. She came in from the barn and found me under her sink. I remember she stood in the doorway and did not say anything for long enough that I looked up. Then she said, "Okay," in a tone I did not know how to read, and went and got 2 cups. Number 3. Crossed off. In my handwriting, because I did it. I did not think one thing about that at the time. Then it was October, in Maine, and the fall in that county is a thing that makes even a person from away start doing arithmetic about the winter. Her storm windows were out. Her bulkhead had 4 inches of rot in the sill, and the wind came under it into her cellar, and her furnace was a 1988 oil boiler, with a nozzle that hadn't been changed in a decade, and I know exactly what that adds up to in January, because I have lived here my whole life. So I started coming out. Saturdays mostly, sometimes on the way home from a shift. I reglazed 6 sashes on her barn floor with a heat gun and a putty knife. I put a new sill under the bulkhead. I planed the front door. I changed her nozzle and pulled her boiler apart and cleaned it, and I put in a shutoff on her outside spigot so it wouldn't split, and I did the ceiling fixture in the back bedroom that had been wired in 1948 by somebody with real optimism. 9 lines in 5 weeks. In my handwriting. And here is what I want to be honest about, because the version of this that makes me look good is available, and I am not going to use it. Those 5 weeks were the best 5 weeks I'd had since my father died. I would get in my truck on a Saturday morning in the dark with a thermos and drive out Bear Hill with a list in my head, and I have never in my life been happier than a man with a list in his head, and a truck full of tools and a place to be needed. We talked. That is the part I would defend to anybody. She had a radio in the barn and we'd have it on the Bangor station, and she'd work on her own things and I'd work on mine, and we talked for hours across 5 weeks about the co-op, about the price of oil, about how she'd learnt to change her own brakes off a video, about my father. She asked me questions, real ones. What was the worst storm? Whether I'd ever been hurt, whether I liked it up in the bucket or was just used to it. There was a Saturday in the last week of October that I would take back over almost any other day of my life. It rained all day, so we were both in the barn, me on the plank floor with 6 storm sashes on sawhorses and a heat gun, her at the bench with a chalk line and a level, doing something with a board that she turned over when I came near, which I noticed and did not think about. The Bangor station was doing a call in about the deer season. The heat gun ticked when it cycled. It smelled like linseed oil and cold hay. She asked me about the worst one, and I told her about the ice in '98, which I only half remember because I was 8. And then about February of 2017, 3 days of no sleep, the crew from New Brunswick coming down to help us. A man from Fredericton whose name I never got handing me a sandwich at 4 in the morning on the Ripley Road. She asked whether I'd ever been hurt. I said once a bad one, a hand injury in 2014 that had me off for 11 weeks. She said, "What did you do for 11 weeks?" And I opened my mouth and had nothing. I sat there on that barn floor with a putty knife in my hand and could not produce one single memory of 11 weeks of my own life. Because I had spent them going to other people's houses and holding a flashlight left-handed is why, and telling everybody I was going crazy sitting still. She let it go. She was good about things like that. She turned back to her board and said something about the rain, and I glazed a sash and I did not think about it again for 2 weeks. That is the whole scene. 2 people in a barn with a radio on, and one honest question that I could not answer, and neither of us knowing yet that it was the entire story in miniature. I did not, in 5 weeks, ask her one question about her life before June. Not one. I could tell you every joint on that house, and I could not have told you her father's name. She never volunteered it, and I never asked, and I told myself that was respect. Denny Ouellette said something to me in the 3rd week. Denny is our line foreman, 61, worked 22 years on a crew with my father. We were coiling rope in the yard, and he said, "You been out Bear Hill a lot. Woman's got no electrician and a bad boiler." He kept coiling. "Your old man used to do Beulah Sprague's whole dooryard, 12 years. That's a nice thing to remember about him." "Sure," Denny said. "And I used to wonder what your ma thought about it. I let that go by like a truck on a wet road, which is what you do at 35 when somebody says a true thing to you a month too early. Micah Hollins showed up on the 1st of November in a Nissan with Connecticut plates and a duffel bag, and I met him because I happened to be on that porch when he pulled in. 31. Her youngest brother. He had her exact eyebrows and none of her stillness. He shook my hand and looked at the pile of storm sashes and said, "You must be the electric guy," and then he said, "So she's really doing this," in a tone I did not care for at all. Dia's face when she came out that door is a thing I will remember to the end of my life. It was not surprise. It was a woman watching weather come up a valley that she had specifically moved 400 miles to get out from under. He stayed 2 nights. I came back on the 2nd one to finish her bulkhead in the dark with a work light, and Micah came out and sat on an overturned bucket and talked to me for 40 minutes. He was not cruel. I want that clear. He was a young man with a beer in his hand who had driven 8 hours, and he loved his sister, and he told me things about her he had absolutely no right to tell me, and that she would have never told me herself. Their mother left in 2002. Dia was 17. There were 4 of them under her: Nolan, Bree, Shane, and Micah, who was 8. Their father, Warren, drove a beer truck and was gone Monday to Thursday, and so from 17 to 26, Thea Hollins ran a household of 5 in Danbury, Connecticut. Micah said the words, "She signed my permission slips," and then laughed like it was a funny thing to say. She never went further than a year of community college. She got a bookkeeping job at 19. She stayed in that house, and then when the 4 of them were grown and out, their father got bad off and needed somebody, and it was 2019. And there was a conversation among 4 adult siblings about what to do, and Micah said, and I am quoting him because I have never forgotten the phrasing, "Well, Thea was the obvious one." 4.5 years. She did it in the same house she grew up in. Warren Hollins died in February of 2024. And in June of 2025, at 40 years old, having never lived one day of her life without somebody in the next room who needed her, Thea Hollins sold that house in Danbury, gave each of her siblings a 1/5 of it, and bought a wreck of a farmhouse in Piscataquis County, Maine, from 400 miles away. She didn't tell anybody where, Micah said, for like 3 weeks. Bree had to find out, from the realtor. I said something about how that must have been hard on all of them. And Michael Hollins said the thing that I have thought about more than anything else anybody said in this entire story. He said, "Everybody keeps saying she needs time." But she didn't just leave a family, man. She left a job. 4 people were counting on that job getting done, and she quit it without giving notice. He shook his head at the yard. Bree's got 2 kids and no help now. Shane's a mess. I called her in August about my car, and she just said I can't. 2 words. 23 years, and then I can't. He drove back on Sunday. I finished the bulkhead, and I did not understand yet that Micah had just handed me the exact key to that woman, and that I was going to use it to do the single dumbest thing I have ever done. Denny came and found me in the yard on the 6th of November. He is not a subtle man, but he is a patient one, and he had clearly been holding this for 3 weeks. How many things you fixed out there now? I don't know. 8, 9, she asked you for any of them? I started to answer, and did not have an answer. Denny put his boot up on the bumper of the truck. I'm going to say this the once, and then I'm done with it, he said. I worked with your father 22 years, and I loved that man, and I watched him rebuild half this county, and I watched your mother pack a car. That's not the same thing. It's exactly the same thing, and you're the only one who can't see it. He was not being unkind. That is what made it land. Ro, you don't love people. You service them. You find the broken thing and you fix it and it works, and everybody's grateful and you get to stand in the kitchen, and then one day there's nothing left broken and you got no idea what you're doing in there, so you go find another house. You're describing a guy who helps people. I'm describing a guy who's never once had to be wanted, Denny said. Only needed. Those are different jobs, and the second one's easier, and you have been taking the easy one your whole life. Then he said we had a pole to set in Abbott, and we went and set a pole in Abbott, and on Saturday the 8th I got up at 5, and I loaded 4 pressure-treated stringers, 16 feet of decking and a framing square into my truck, and I drove out to Bear Hill Road while she was in town, doing the books for the hardware store, and I rebuilt her porch steps. Number 17. 4 steps, treads, and stringers, the way the list said. It took me 5 hours and they were good. I want that on the record. They were plumb and level and solid, and they will be standing when I am dead. I built them the way my father built things, which is 1 notch better than necessary. I even brought a pen for the refrigerator. That is how far in I was. I had the pen in my coat. She got home a little after 2 and got out of her car with a bag of groceries in each arm, and she stopped in the dooryard, 20 feet away, and looked at those steps for a very long time. She did not say anything. She did not come up them. She stood there with the groceries and looked at them, and her chin started going, and then she turned around and put the groceries back in the car, and she said, I need you to leave. Please. Right now. I'm not going to be able to do this politely. I left. I sat in my truck at the bottom of Bear Hill Road for about 10 minutes, and then I did the only thing my whole body knew how to do, which was drive back up to see if there was something I could fix. Her car was gone. I sat in the dooryard a minute, and then I went into the barn to get my heat gun, which was a lie I was telling myself. Because the heat gun was in my truck. The barn floor was swept. Her tools were on a bench, arranged, a circular saw, a framing square, a speed square, a 16-ounce hammer, a chalk line, all of it new within the last 6 months. All of it lined up the way a person lines things up when nobody ever taught them, and they are going off a book. And along the back wall, against the boards, there were 6 sets of stair stringers, 6, cut out of 2 by 12s, standing on end against the wall in a row. The first one was a disaster. The rise was uneven, and the cuts overshot at every corner, and the whole thing was out of square by 1.5 inches. The second was better. The third had the treads right, and the rise wrong. On the 4th, she had written on the stock in pencil, in that small back-slanted handwriting, 7 rise, 10 run, 4 rises, don't forget the drop, with the arithmetic worked out 3 times down the side of the board, and 1 line scratched out, and done again. The 5th was close. The sixth was perfect. It was cut clean and square, and it was leaning against that wall waiting for a Saturday, and beside it was a receipt from the lumber yard in Guildford dated 4 days earlier for 4 pressure-treated 2x12s and a box of deck screws. She had been practicing since July. On scrap. Alone, in a barn, for 4 months, a woman who had never in her life been the one who got taught anything had been teaching herself to cut a set of stairs, and she had failed at it 5 times and gotten up and done it again, and she had bought the good lumber 4 days ago, because she was finally ready. And on Saturday, while she was in town doing somebody's books, a man had come out with a truck full of material and done it for her in 5 hours, out of kindness, and left it there like a bouquet. I sat down on an overturned crate in that barn and I did not get up for a while. Camille's note was 3 years old and in a drawer under the takeout menus, and I finally understood that I had never actually read it. I had understood it as an accusation about conversation. You never asked me what I'm afraid of. It is not about conversation. It is about arithmetic. Every single thing I had ever done for a person I had chosen, not one of them had chosen it. I had walked into house after house and looked around for what was broken, and every time I fixed a thing, I got to feel like the answer to something, and not once in 35 years, had I stood in front of a person with nothing in my hands and said, "What do you actually want?" I drove home the long way, out through Sangerville, past the church steps my father rebuilt in 1996 that are still there and still true. I got the note out of the drawer that night and sat at my own kitchen table with it, and I read it 11 or 12 times, and then I did something I have not told many people about, which is that I went and got a legal pad of my own and tried to write down what my mother had wanted. Not what she complained about, what she wanted. I gave myself an hour. I got 3 items and 2 of them were guesses. My father ploughed 4 driveways in this town for free and rebuilt a church and got under Baylor Sprague's house on a Sunday and was buried in front of 400 people, and his own son, at 35, sitting at a table with a pen, could name 3 things his mother might have wanted and was not sure about 2 of them. That is not a man who was cold. I want to be fair to him. He was not cold. He was the warmest man in this county. That is a man who never once asked, because asking is the part where you might find out that what somebody wants is not something you know how to build. I did not sleep much. Around 2 I got up and went out to the truck and got the framing square out of my toolbox and put it on the counter, and I did not know why I did that until Sunday afternoon. She called me on Sunday afternoon and said, "Come up. I owe you a conversation, and I'd rather not owe it long." I got there at 4. It was already going dark, the way it does up here in November, and she had the kitchen light on over the table. The porch steps I built were still there. She had come and gone up them a dozen times by then, because there was no other way into the house, and I think that was part of what had her voice the way it was. She did not sit down. She stood with her back against the counter and her arms folded, and she said, "How long have you been in that barn?" "Yesterday. About an hour." "So you saw the 6 of them." "I saw the 6 of them." Dear Hollands closed her eyes for a second. "I need to say this badly and all at once," she said, "and I need you not to be nice to me while I do it, because if you're nice to me, I'll stop." I said okay. "I have never in my life had a room that was only mine," she said. "I was 17 when my mother left, and I had 4 kids under me by Thursday. I have signed permission slips, and I have made 200 lunches a week, and I have taken a man to 111 appointments in 4 years. And I would do the whole thing again, so this is not a complaint. This is the facts." Thea. "And in June, I bought a broken house in a state I'd never been to, on purpose. Because a broken house is a thing that needs you back in a way that doesn't cost anything. Her voice was going, and she kept talking through it, which was worse. I picked the worst one on the listing. Do you understand that? I chose the rot, because if I fixed 41 things by myself with my own hands, then at the end of it I would be a person who could do things, instead of a person things get done to. She stopped and pushed the heel of her hand across her eye, hard, and got it back. And then you came up my road at 1 a.m. in the rain. I know. You don't, though. She looked at me. You have been so good to me. That's the problem. That's the entire problem. You come out here on your Saturdays and you fix my house, and you ask me nothing and you take nothing, and every single week I have gotten a little bit worse at being alone, and I need to be good at being alone. Because it took me 40 years to get here, and I don't have another 40. Then she said it. Stop fixing things in my house. You're making it hard to stay alone. The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed and kicked off. And here is what I did not do, which is the only reason I get to tell this story from a house instead of a duplex on the Guildford Road. I did not defend myself. I did not explain that the boiler nozzle was genuinely a safety issue, which it was. I did not offer to stop coming, which is the noble-sounding version of leaving, and which is exactly what I did to Camille Furland in 2022, while telling myself I was respecting her wishes. I said, "Can I ask you something? I've been out here 5 weeks, and I haven't asked you one thing." She waited. What did you want number 17 to feel like? She made a sound like she'd been hit when you finished it, I said. You'd have been standing there in the dooryard on a Saturday with a saw and 6 sets of practice stringers behind you in the barn. What was that supposed to feel like? Thea Hollins put both hands over her face and cried in her own kitchen in front of a man for what I would bet money was the first time in 23 years. When she could talk, she said, like the first thing. The first thing that was what? The first thing that was mine. She wiped her face with her sleeve. I've never made anything. I've maintained things. There's a difference, and nobody in my family has ever once been able to see it. I took that. You did. I'm not going to say I meant well, because I did mean well, and it's the least useful sentence in the world. I turned my hat over in my hands. Here's what I've got. I'm no good at this. I've got one move, and I've been running it since I was 12 years old, because it's how my father stayed in a room, and it worked on everybody I ever met, and it stopped working here, and I would rather learn a second move at 35 than go find an easier house. She was very still. So I'm asking for a rule instead of a favor, I said. That list is yours. All 41. I don't touch a line unless you say the words out loud, and when it's done, you're the one who crosses it off, and if you never say the words, then I'm a guy who comes up here on Saturdays and hands you the chalk line and shuts up. And number 17 is the one I can't give back. I said it straight. I can tear it out. I'll tear it out tonight and you can put yours in. And I'd do it, but I don't think that's what you want either. Because it'd be me fixing it again. I put the framing square on her kitchen table. The one out of my truck. My father's, actually. His name is scratched into the blade with a nail. G. Michaud. The way men did in 1974. That's not a gift, I said, before she could say anything. It's a loan and I want it back. But you're going to do the barn stairs at some point with that 6th set, and mine's better than the one you bought, and it's the one thing in my truck that's worth anything to me. She looked at it on the table for a long moment without touching it. Say the words, she said. What? That's the rule you just made. So say the words. Her chin was up, and her eyes were still wet, and she was, I understood right then, going to be the person who ran this thing for the rest of my life. Ask me if I want it. I asked her if she wanted it. She said yes. Dia looked at those 4 steps through the storm door for a long moment. No, she said. It stays. It's evidence. Of what? Of what I let happen when somebody's kind to me. She almost laughed. It came out wrecked and real. I'm going to look at it every single day for the rest of my life and remember to say the words out loud. She rebuilt the bulkhead herself in the spring, and it is not as good as mine, and she knows it is not as good as mine, and it is hers. Her 6th set of stringers went into the barn stairs that July. They are still there. Corner of the hayloft. Plum, she asked me out loud, in words for 8 things over the following 3 years, and I did those 8, and she stood there with a pen and drew a line through each one when it was done, and I have never enjoyed anything more in my life than being handed a job by that woman. Micah came back up the summer after, and stayed a week and did not once mention the family's arithmetic, and Bree came in October with her kids, and there is a photograph on our stairs of the 4 Holland siblings and their sister on those porch steps. Number 17. The evidence. Denny Ouellette was at the wedding in September of 2027 and cried more than anybody, and denied it in the parking lot. The list is still on the refrigerator, 6 years on. Yellow legal paper, soft at the folds. Number 3 is in my handwriting, the kitchen faucet, hot side, the one I did before either of us knew what we were doing. Number 17 is in my handwriting, and it has a small star drawn next to it by her, which she has never explained and which I have never asked about, because I have learned a few things. And number 41, the last line on the page, in that small, hard, backslanted writing, which she wrote in a farmhouse in Maine in October of 2025 when she did not know one person in this county, is not crossed off. It says 41. Learn to live in this alone. She has never crossed it off. I asked her about it once. On the porch, a year or so into the marriage, she said she was leaving it up there for 3 reasons. Because it was the truest thing she ever wrote down. Because she did finish it, out in that barn, before I ever got a vote. And because a woman who has learned to live alone and then chooses not to is a completely different creature than a woman who never learned, and she wanted it on the refrigerator, in her own handwriting, where she could see it every morning for the rest of her life.